Hello, my name is Ashley, this is Faithful Ratters, and welcome back. So in today's video I'm going to be talking to you about bioactive cages, how to set one up, and troubleshooting, and all about Bioactive. Now before we get into that, I just want to apologise for the lack of keeping to my upload schedule. I was super busy and ill in the past couple of weeks, and then I went to a rat show and I had an MRI this morning, and so it's just been a bit hectic here and I've not really had time to sit down and film a video and edit it, and I'm doing that this afternoon. I have actually filmed this video, but without realising that on my new phone my front camera is actually worse quality and I'm just not happy with it. So I am trying for the first time to film on my back camera, so the angling may be a little bit out of it today, but we'll see. That is my plan, that hopefully this will be higher quality than the previous video and that it will be good for you. I need to find a device so I can see what you can see, because at the moment I'm literally just looking at the camera and I have no idea if I'm centered or whatever. So do forgive me if we are out of center, but I'm really excited to talk about this topic because bioactive cages are my thing, my jam. I absolutely love them. I've made a couple of videos on the topic about bioactive cages, and one of them is the reasons why I love my bioactive cage. So as you can see, I really do like them. So first of all, let's talk about what do I mean by bioactive cage. Now I'm going to have to be a little bit more specific and say that when it comes to rats, we're technically looking at an enclosure that is semi-bioactive, and that is because bioactive is a term that refers to a enclosure that has a complete nitrogen cycle. Now this involves the waste, the excrement, then it involves that being broken down in the substrate by bacteria and inverts, and then it also is the usage by the plants in the enclosure. Now when it comes to rats, if you put plants in there, they will get destroyed, and this is something you can't really get around. They are very destructive to plants. They enjoy eating them. It's great enrichment for them, but they don't last very long, and not enough to complete that cycle. So we can't technically use the word bioactive when it comes to a rat cage because it is semi-bioactive. However, I think it's kind of long-winded and clunky, so I do prefer to say bioactive and then clarify that I mean semi-bioactive. I have had people online like jump down my throat for calling my enclosures bioactive, but that's just what we do. We call them bioactive even though technically they're semi-bioactive. So I mentioned cleanup crew, and this is really important, but the other really important thing is that your rats are litter trained, because if there is too much biological load in the soil, your cleanup crew won't be able to deal with it. And especially if you've got big numbers of rats living in your cage, that is a lot of waste. Rats are very big animals in comparison to some other animals that live in bioactive enclosures, and we keep multiple in the same cage. So it's really important that they have litter trays that are cleaned out regularly, that they use properly in order to lessen the waste that does go into the bioactive soil, especially when it comes to pooping. Poop is really heavy on the soil, whereas urine is a little bit easier for it to cope with, but an excess of poop is really difficult for it to deal with, and something that you really want to avoid by using litter trays in prime real estate locations in the cage. Another question that people might have, and that is why would you go for bioactive? Now I love bioactive because it is natural for them. This is where they would live in the wild. They would live in the soil outside. They are fossorial animals, so they're living underground in burrows and things like that. And I think it's really good for the owner because it is cheaper in the long run. You don't have to regularly replace it, you don't have to clean it out, so it's really beneficial for you time-wise as well. And with a busy schedule and lots of rats to take care of, not having to change out substrate is a really big help. And it's really good at holding tunnels and burrows so that the rats can enjoy their hard work of burrowing and tunneling. And I have a video all about why I love bioactive and why I recommend it, so I will link that either in the cards or in the description somewhere, just so you can check that video out if you want. But I do have a playlist about rat cages on my channel if you want to find it easily. Now, onto the interesting bit. How are you going to set up a bioactive cage? So the first thing is you need a good sized cage for the group of rats that you have, and then you need to make sure that you have a watertight base for the soil to be in. Now, some cages, some of the smaller cages like the Coco Large and the Mamba 100 here in this country, do have a decently sized base that you could use. I would say you do want your bioactive soil to be quite deep and deeper than normal substrate. This is really important for it to be able to hold its moisture and for it to be able to hold the tunnels. And you need to make sure that the tray, the perspex tray you are making, is watertight, which isn't as important when it comes to normal substrate. To make it watertight, I personally use tape, and then I use something that's called perspex weld or plastic cement, something like that. I think it's called Tensol 40 or something like that. I'll leave a link in the description to the cement that I use. It's really simple. You pull it out in the syringe that they give you and you put it on the cracks, and what it does is it creates a chemical reaction so that the two pieces of acrylic will sort of melt together, and that creates a really lovely sealed tight effect. It can break over time and you may need to redo it. I'm actually needing to do that for my boys cage, but it does hold up really well. I've seen other people use things like aquarium sealant and silicone. You just need to look into the options and see what works best for you. Then you're going to have to think about what soil to use. So personally, I think it's good to use a mixture of things to create a balanced substrate. So one of those things is organic topsoil without any fertilizers or any added chemicals and without any peat. These are harmful to the rats, so you want it to be organic and free of any added extras like peat or chemicals or fertilizers or anything like that. You can also use cocoa coir or cocoa soil. This usually comes in big blocks that you use water to rehydrate and it becomes a nice damp soil. I also like to add in mix-ins, and when I say mix-ins, this is just other things to add texture and depth to the soil. So I have in the past used things like cardboard substrate or wood shavings or hay just to create a nice texture to the soil. Over time it will get a better texture to it as things are accidentally dropped in there. My soil at the moment actually has a lot of shells in there. I gave our rats some, I think they were oyster shells that we got from, I think it was a Chinese restaurant that we visited once, and so I gave those shells, they cleaned them out and they're just in there. They make a really good texture and the rats do love to play with them. So anything extra like that in the soil is always a good thing as well. The most important thing to add in is your cleanup crew. Without the cleanup crew, this is not bioactive and you will have to clean out and change the soil, which is a real big pain in the bum. So you will need to at least have springtails, but I do also recommend using isopods as well, and you can also use worms. That is not something that I've used, but it is something that does work. So isopods, you want to go for the smaller species and the cheaper species. You don't really want to be wasting your money on exotic, expensive, rare isopods for this, because the rats will find some of them and eat them, and you don't really want to waste the money like that on the isopods that are just going to get eaten. So I personally use the tropical grey ones because those are very cheap compared to the other species. I do also keep a colony of tropical greys so that I don't have to buy them every time I want to add in new. You could also use dwarf white. I personally haven't had good experience with buying them, and that I think that's just a personal look situation. I don't think that's just tropical whites in general. But tropical whites are much smaller than other isopod species and so are much less likely to be found by your rats and eaten. Springtails, I would just go with the normal white ones, but you can get different colours. I think different species that are different colours. You're very unlikely to see them again once you've put them in, as they are very small little things, no bigger than a grain of sand, but they are very important. The isopods are going to be eating the physical waste like the poo, and the springtails are going to be eating the mould or anything like that that may occur. You can also use worms, and worms are particularly good at turning the soil and mixing it, but they are going to be more likely to be eaten by our rats, and so it's not something that I've ever gone for, because I don't really fancy wasting my money on inverts that are going to be eaten rather than do their job in the cage. But I do know people who have used them and have had decent success with them. You may have seen a lot of people having issues with their bioactive cage, and I thought that in this video I could troubleshoot some of these problems and hopefully help you to get ahead of these problems and plan in case they do happen, so that you aren't left scrambling when something does slightly go wrong. So the first thing that is high on the list, and this is different types of pests that can be drawn to the soil. Now these are pretty easy to deal with. Personally, I have dealt with fungus gnats and also moths. We got the pantry moths with the soil when I got it 2 years ago, and for a while I just had to pick out caterpillar after caterpillar after caterpillar after caterpillar, and eventually the moths died out and we've never really had a problem with them since. But I know people have had issues with those, and we've also had a fungus gnat problem, which has been pretty annoying to deal with, and I think we're finally on top of it. So when it comes to the pests, there are 2 things that I recommend doing. The first one is using nematodes specific to the pest that you have, and nematodes are little worms that eat the eggs and the larvae of the pest insects, and then you will use something to kill the adults so they can't repopulate the soil with eggs. And we have an electric fly zapper. You may have heard it in some of my videos, or you may have seen the blue light that it emits. You could also use things like sticky traps. I just find these are really unsightly, and it's not my preference to have them around the house, but they do work pretty well as well. Just something to get rid of the adults so that they don't continue laying eggs. But the nematodes have really gotten on top of it. For me, it did take a couple of treatments, but they do seem to have got rid of the bulk of the problem. You do need to make sure that your soil stays turned and moist so that the soil is healthy and the cleanup crew can rejuvenate. If you feel like the cleanup crew is lacking a little bit, whether that's due to you not being able to see them as often as usual, or you feel the pests are taking over, you can add in more. And I do this on a bit of a schedule every couple of months or so, but once you have a healthy soil, you aren't really needing to add in a lot of the extra cleanup crew. And especially if you have mature soil, you will also be building up a group of beneficial bacteria that can help you when it comes to keeping the soil healthy and clean. Another problem that people run into is that they find it to be super dusty, and this can happen if your rats are not turning the soil very well, or if they're not too into digging at a certain time. And this is something that you will need to keep on top of, making sure that water is there when it's needed. This can be once a week, a couple of times a week. It really depends on the environment that you live in. If you live in a very dry climate, you'll be having to add in water more than usual. But if you live in quite a humid environment, you may not have to add it in as often as others. Another problem that people run into is that the weight of the soil with the water in there causes issues with their base and their cage, and so things snap and break. One thing that I have done that helps to keep mine from doing that, my boys' cage actually came with a dolly for the Perspex tray, and my girls' cage, because it's a little bit closer to the ground because it doesn't have the wheels on, I have added in wooden slats underneath just to hold the weight of the Perspex, and that seems to be doing pretty well. So make sure you are considering this. Some people I've seen use bricks or other things like that just to hold up the weight. Another problem that you may have is that your rats may not dig enough, and you may find yourself having to turn the soil quite often. This is true of my boys at the moment, and it's just something that you need to deal with, sadly. I found that my rats go through phases of digging and not digging. My girls are better at digging than my boys, but they do go through phases of not digging as well, and this is something you will need to keep on top of by turning the soil. You can also use things like willow tunnels or any of the sort of cork tunnels or things like that to give them a burrow starter to help encourage them to dig, but I do find that sometimes they're just not into it, and particular rats enjoy it more than others, and that's okay too. It's not something that I would take away the bioactive soil for though, because I think it's really important to give them the opportunity to dig if they so wish, and taking away the depth of substrate I don't think is fair, and it doesn't really help them to express their natural behaviours. The penultimate problem that I'm going to talk about is you may have an issue with having too much poo or too much waste in the soil, and your cleanup crew aren't able to keep on top of it. Now in this case I would look at your litter training. Where are you placing the litter trays? One thing that I would recommend is having your litter trays near the places that your rats sleep. This will encourage them to go right after they wake up, and it doesn't involve them traipsing across the cage to go to the toilet. This is really important. There goes the fly zapper. I would also make sure that your substrate is different that you're using in the litter tray, so they recognise it as such, and that your litter trays are big enough for multiple rats to get in at the same time and use. Otherwise they may not use them because they might feel squished or uncomfortable when they stand in there. And the last problem is mold. You may find this happens. It's not something that I've ever dealt with, thankfully. However, because springtails are the insect that is eating the mold, what you will need to do is remove the affected soil and add in extra springtails to help boost and clean up that area. I have read and seen online that people have had a little bit of mold pop up and the next day it's gone and the springtails are there and the springtails are doing their job. So if you have any other problems and questions maybe about Bioactive, do leave them down in the comments and I'll be able to help you there. I hope this video is really helpful. I really do love my Bioactive, and it's not for everyone, and I don't think it has to be for everyone, but it is something that I recommend people try, and it's something that I really enjoy, and so I thought I would impart this knowledge to you because it's something that I haven't made a video like this about. I haven't made an educational how-to video about Bioactive on my channel, and over the past couple of weeks I've actually had a couple of people asking me questions about Bioactive in this sort of style, this sort of realm, and I haven't had any videos to send along to them, so I thought I would do one today. And yes, that is everything. Please do stick around and subscribe if you want to see more of my channel. I make educational videos like this, but I also vlog and talk about my personal experiences, and I do like to make educational videos based on my own experience and share what I've learned along the way. So yes, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!